Those of you who've heard me speak before have heard this, but I always like to start out by thanking B&H for their commitment to customer education, not just simply having Canon here, but all the other wonderful speakers and presenters that they have come to the event space here. There's, over the years, a wealth of information and knowledge has been dispensed to their customers at all levels. It's a wonderful thing. I have the good fortune of working for a company, Canon, that believes in customer education, and that's what we're going to give you a little of today. In fact, we have our own digital learning center online, totally free, with a lot of information, and the amount of information is always growing. So that's certainly something that, like I say, we remain committed to as well. Our purpose today is, and it's certainly pretty clear from the title of our program, Beyond the Green Zone, is to talk about how to take your camera and move beyond the totally automatic settings. Before I go any further, for those who are here at the event space today, just a quick show of hands. How many of you are not Canon shooters? You shoot with a different brand of camera. Anybody? Okay, a couple of you. That's fine. No problem. We're totally inclusive here. And we made it clear in our description that 95% of what we talk about is completely applicable to pretty much any interchangeable lens camera. So, you know, there may be a couple of points along the way where we reference something that's kind of camera related, and I'm going to talk about how a Canon camera would do it. It may be a little different with your brand. Okay, so just keep those things in mind. But we welcome all photographers to this. And really what we're talking about, again, is you starting to take control of your camera and control of your images. And just one last thing before we get going, I want to make clear, we're not saying, hey, just roll back the clock and start going, you know, turn it back to 1960 and do everything completely manually or whatever. You certainly can do that with any modern day camera if you want to, but that's not what this class is about. This class is about how you can still utilize the benefits of automatic exposure control, where the camera adjusts for different, you know, sun, shade, etc., but how you can start to influence the look and feel of your pictures. There are a lot of benefits in terms of what do you get by taking your camera off the totally automatic green, fully auto settings. The main thing really is that you start to control how your pictures look. There are going to be times where that really doesn't matter, when you are literally taking snapshots around the dinner table or at a 4th of July picnic or something like that. But then there are going to be other times where you see something and you want to capture it a certain way. It can really help to understand how to make the camera speak the language you want. Certainly with the Canon cameras, and this is probably the case with many of our competitors as well, if you simply change your exposure mode from the green full auto setting to one of what we call the creative zone modes, we'll get into that, you then suddenly open up a treasure chest in your camera. All the menu features become available, all the custom functions and so on. On a Canon camera, a lot of that stuff is deliberately locked out when you are in the totally automatic green zone in the interest of keeping things simple. And then finally, you know, you could argue that this may be the most important thing of all, is that once you start to become comfortable with working with some of the controls in your camera and starting to understand, I see something, I want to record it a certain way, and here's how to do it in the camera without a lot of fuss, you will gain a powerful amount of confidence in your own photography. It is a big, big step forward, and it's not a difficult step. And hopefully with some of the information we talk about today, you'll begin to understand some of that. So in terms of what we hope you walk away with today, one, of course, is understanding those fundamental camera settings. And some of you may well have an idea now of what a shutter speed is or an aperture or whatever, but we're going to go over that to make sure that everybody in the room is clear on that kind of thing. And more importantly, is not just an academic exercise like, you know, what's a wide or a small aperture, but what are the different visual impacts that these different settings can do? How can you use these settings to get the look you want in a given picture? And then using the right exposure mode as a road to get you where you want to be. So in this discussion, there are really two primary elements, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times. Even though I'm talking about picking an exposure mode first, really, this is kinda secondary. And the last thing I would want is for anybody either listening to us online or here in the room to leave at the end of this event thinking that, oh, I gotta, if I'm taking a sports picture, I gotta be in this mode. Oh, but if I'm taking a portrait, I gotta be in this mode. Oh, I'm taking a picture of my house, I gotta be in this mode. Good photographers can be in one mode 98% of the time and get the look they want in any of those scenarios and a million others. So, as much as anything, understanding the power of your different exposure modes in your camera is understanding what's the best route for me. And then here's where the rubber really meets the road, so to speak, is understanding how to make the settings within it to get the look you want. So let's talk about a few of those photographic fundamentals. And these haven't changed since Matthew Brady was photographing Civil War battlefields. Basically, with any camera, there are going to be three fundamental photographic settings. And they're going to impact a couple of things. One is they'll impact exposure. How light or dark are your results? Changing one or the other can change how light or dark your pictures look, and that can be a useful thing to get the look you want or just simply to get proper exposure in a given situation. The other, and this is where the fun comes in, is that changing these settings can influence the look of your pictures. You can change them and get a different creative effect. There's not just one way to take a picture, there's lots of different ways, and we're going to show you that. So, let's dive in. Many of you have no doubt heard the term shutter speed. That's the first thing we'll talk about. The shutter speed is simply the length of time that the shutter is open, the length of time that our digital imaging sensor, or if we're still shooting film, the piece of film is exposed to light. This graphic here is an actual electronic shutter from one of our cameras. And basically, shutter speed dictates how long that shutter stays open. When we hear the term a fast shutter speed, we're talking about the shutter being open a very brief period of time. A fraction of a second, and a very brief fraction of a second at that. A 500th of a second, a 1,000th of a second, a 2,000th of a second. Photographers refer to these as fast shutter speeds. Shutters only open a very, very brief period of time. Conversely, we also have slow or long shutter speeds, where the shutter is open for longer periods. They can be longer fractions of a second, a 15th of a second, a quarter of a second, a half a second, a full second, or even longer. The camera's letting more light in for longer periods of time. There are times and places where you're going to want to use one or the other, but it's just important to have a picture in your mind of what they are and how they work. If you take a look at the commonly used shutter speeds in traditional numbers, you'd see numbers like this. And again, they're fractions of a second. Your camera reports that information to you, but it doesn't show it as a fraction. It simply shows it as a digit. So if you look on the far right, 1/1000th of a second, a fast shutter speed, your camera reports in your viewfinder 1,000. And pretty much all cameras do this, not just Canon, but competitive brands as well. It's important to kind of understand what the terminology means. When we say in today's world a fast shutter speed, photographers usually mean a speed around a 500th of a second or higher. In other words, a briefer fraction of a second, 1/1000th of a second, 1/2000th of a second, and so on. Again, that's, when a photographer uses that term, a fast shutter speed. Typically, when photographers shooting, everyday type situations refer to a slow shutter speed, normally they're referring to speeds like around a 30th or a 15th of a second and longer, an 1/8 of a second, a quarter of a second, a full second. Those are what we refer to as slow shutter speeds. Now, the important thing to take away from this is that for most handheld photography, and let me insert this as well, for our discussion today, for the most part, I'm not talking about what's going on when you put the camera on a tripod and in low light or whatever. We'll talk briefly about that in one instance, but other than that, you can pretty much assume that the advice, the situations, and so on that we're talking about today refer to handheld photography. It could be in daylight, could be in dim light, whatever, but we're referring to the kind of things that you and I can do with our camera and whatever lenses we choose to use. So in ordinary handheld photography with conventional lenses, we want to be using shutter speeds around a 60th of a second or faster, usually. And we'll get into in depth as to why. Now, the numbers you see here are traditional, what we call full stop increments. Don't let the term scare you if you're not familiar with what we mean by stop. If you look, there's a pattern to these. If we go from the far right, 1/1000th of a second to 1/500th of a second, we basically doubled the amount of time the shutters open at a 500th of a second. If we go from 1/500th to a 2/50th of a second, the shutters open twice as long again. Each jump on these numbers, we're either doubling the amount of time the shutters open or going the other way, we'd be cutting it in half. That gap of doubling it or cutting it in half, photographers traditionally refer to as a stop. So just keep that in mind. It means doubling the amount of light coming in, or conversely, like I say, cutting it in half. Now, on modern electronic cameras, we can actually do this in even finer increments. All Canon cameras and pretty much all competitive cameras as well, interchangeable lens cameras, allow you to work in third of a stop increments, so you get much finer control of the speeds when you want it. You can really kind of tweak them, slow them down a little, speed them up a little if you want to. Just as an example of what we're talking about, if you go between 1/125th and a 2/50th, which are very common everyday shutter speeds, there actually are two additional speeds, 1/160th and 1/200th of a second. So, and it's perfectly okay to use those if and when you want. They aren't the traditional old style full stop speeds you would have seen back in the 1960s and 70s, but they're a neat feature to have. And understand that your camera displays your shutter speed in the viewfinder. Again, if you're working with a competitive brand, it may look a little different, but on a Canon camera, it'll look something like this. The first number in the string of information on the bottom of the viewfinder is the shutter speeds. That is an important number to understand. Let's take a look at what this means in practical terms in real life, in terms of the effective shutter speeds. I said that the three primary elements in photography, starting with your shutter speeds, can impact two things: your exposure, and then, if you will, the creative, in air quotes, look of your picture. Let's look at what the effect of the exposure is. If I speed the shutter up, less light is able to come through. The shutter's open for a briefer period of time, so the exposures will get darker. I can lighten and darken my pictures for creative reasons, or just simply to get what I think is the right exposure by changing shutter speeds if I choose to. So for example, this first picture is taken at 125th of a second. What would happen if we cut the light in half? Well, go to a 2/50th, get something like that. This is an important thing to have in your mind. What happens? What kind of effect can you expect when you double the amount of light coming through, or when you cut it in half? I remember when I was first exposed to this back when I was a teenager, I was thinking, oh my God, if you cut the amount of light in half, God, it's going to be just totally dark or whatever. You wouldn't be able to see a darn thing. No, it's not like that. What happens if I cut it in half again? 1/4 as much light. You can see these are viable effects, and effects that a thinking photographer will use on a regular basis. So exposure is one thing that the shutter speed controls. How much light is allowed to come in just by how long the shutter's open. The other thing is basically, how is it going to deal with motion? Any motion in the scene. Faster shutter speeds will freeze movement. Here, the shot taken at a 500th of a second. That's sufficiently fast to freeze many forms of human activity. I won't say all forms, but this is really your minimum speed you'd want to be at for shooting typical action type pictures. Here's a shot taken at 1,000th of a second. You can see even the spokes on the wheels of the bike are tack sharp or darn close to it. Fast shutter speeds freeze action. You've all seen this effect, no doubt, where the visual impact of a slower shutter speed gives us deliberate blur to anything that's moving in the scene. And that can, sort of visually suggest speed and so on. Again, I know you've seen this effect many times in magazines and so on. Here, a shot taken at 1/8 of a second. A relatively long or slow shutter speed. Here's a shot taken at 1/4 of a second. You get that real sense of movement there because of the deliberate blur of that SUV that just happens to be passing by with a wide-angle lens. So creatively, blurring things in a picture that are moving can be an interesting effect from time to time. It's maybe not something you want to do all the time. I get it. but just understand you can do that, and that can be kind of cool by slowing your shutter down. Now, that's great when it's what you want to do. It's not so great when it isn't what you want to do. And this is yet another of those little nuggets that I hope if you leave this room or leave the online viewing, remembering nothing else, that you remember this. The concept of what we call a safe handheld shutter speed. Because if we take a picture at a slower shutter speed and we just jiggle the camera a little bit because we're shivering in the cold, or because we had too much coffee, or just because we have a pulse, we can get results that aren't so hot. This is the kind of thing we're looking for. So understand that depending on the lens you have on the camera, and to some degree if it's a zoom lens where it's zoomed to, there's a traditional decades-old concept of what is a safe minimum shutter speed that you want to be at. You want to be at that or faster to avoid accidental handheld shake. And the rule of thumb has always been 1 over the focal length of the lens you're using. So if you have a shutter speed of 1 over whatever the millimeter number of the lens you're using is, that traditionally has been, okay, at that shutter speed, you should be able to handhold relatively safely and under ordinary circumstances get sharp pictures. So for example, if we were using a 50 millimeter lens, that would equate to a 1/50th of a second. If we were using a longer 200 millimeter telephoto lens, remember, we're magnifying the image with that telephoto lens. We also magnify any movement. So we need a faster shutter speed as a minimum safe shutter speed for just good sharp pictures in ordinary situations. So traditionally, using that rule of thumb, we'd say a 200th of a second or faster, a 2/50th, a 500th, a 1000th, whatever. Now, technology has to a degree come to the rescue. Canon and many other companies have image stabilization. In the case of Canon cameras, it's in the lens of the camera. It isn't in the camera body itself. So not every Canon lens has optical image stabilization, but many of them do. And image stabilization is able to actually detect your movement, not a subject's movement, but your movement, your shake, and apply an optical correction in the lens to counter it. So up to a point, it can really do some nice things. You can work at shutter speeds 2, 3, even 4 stops slower than that traditional rule of thumb when you're using an IS lens, assuming you're photographing a stationary subject. Because again, the Canon image stabilization, and as far as I know, anybody else's, cannot freeze subject movement. If a subject's moving and you're working at a slow speed, you're going to get blurs like those car pictures I showed you and so on. In real life situations, for most amateur photographers, most enthusiasts, there are 3 situations where you're going to run into this whole thing about having to think about, oh, am I at a fast enough shutter speed that I'm not going to get a blur? One is when you're shooting in low light, especially without a flash. You know, you start doing this kind of stuff, and today's cameras, even at the entry level, make it so easy to work at higher ISOs and work without flash and get photography in situations like this. I think back a couple of decades ago when we were all shooting film, and to a large extent, this was the stuff of dreams. I mean, unless you were working with a tripod and so on, this was the stuff of dreams. It's a reality now. So you can do this kind of stuff, but just be aware. It's a low light situation. All else being equal, the camera needs more light coming in to get a good exposure. All else being equal, shutter speeds are going to tend to be longer and slower. So you want to make sure that you're at a safe handheld speed. Another situation, even sometimes in broad daylight, can be if you're shooting with a telephoto lens. The longer the telephoto lens is, the more powerful the lens, the more it's magnifying the image and bringing you in close, the more it's magnifying any movement. So that can be a problem even in daylight situations. So, you know, you want those good sharp pictures with plenty of detail, mind your minimum shutter speeds. And in the third place that you're likely to see this whole issue of using a fast enough shutter speed on an everyday basis is when you're photographing close-ups of small objects. Whether we're shooting with a real macro lens or just shooting close-ups of flowers in our backyard or whatever it might be. This is another place where you want to make sure you're working at a fast enough shutter speed that you can get good sharp images. Now again, the camera shows you the shutter speed in the viewfinder. Every time you go to take a picture, even if you're working in the green zone, which I'm hopefully encouraging you to move beyond, the camera's showing you the shutter speed that you're working at, whether you set it or whether the camera's setting it automatically. It's up to you to take a look at that, and when you see that number 30 in this hypothetical instance, it's telling you, hey, we're going to shoot this picture at a 30th of a second. Is that going to be fast enough for you to safely hand hold it without jiggling the camera? You got to weigh and assess. And if it isn't, if you say to yourself, danger, danger, it's up to you to make whatever changes are necessary. We'll show you how to do that so that you can be working at a fast enough shutter speed that you can safely hand hold. It's important because you can have the greatest subject in the world, you can be using the greatest lens in the world, you could pay as much for it as you would for a small car, and so on. But if you shake the camera and you're working at a slow shutter speed, guess what? You're not going to get sharp pictures. So it's critical to understand that. So shutter speeds are an important thing to wrap our minds around. The next one of those basic settings to just understand what we're talking about is our lens aperture, the opening on the lens. Now, over time, we've seen lots of different terminology for this. You may have seen it referred to as an aperture, a diaphragm. People that do video often refer to it as an iris. They're all talking the same thing. Basically, how wide or small is the lens opening that's letting light through the lens. And we can control this. We can let the camera do it automatically, or we can control it ourselves. We can have the lens wide open, or we can close it down so it's a smaller opening, much like the concept is exactly the same as the pupil in your eye. In bright light, the pupil in your eye gets smaller. It contracts so that not too much light comes in to your eye itself. And of course, in dim light, your pupils dilate. They open up to let as much light in as they can. So in a darkened room, you can kind of see what's going on. The concept of a lens aperture in a camera lens is exactly the same. In low light situations, all else being equal, you're probably going to want to be working at wider openings to let more light in. And conversely, bright sunny day, hey, all else being equal, you're probably going to be working at smaller openings to control how much light comes in so we don't wash the picture out. So obviously, different lens openings have an exposure effect. If we change a lens opening, for instance, if we start out with a fairly wide opening and then make it smaller and we don't change anything else, we can expect that less light's going to hit the sensor as we go to smaller and smaller openings, and we're going to get a darker result. So just like shutter speeds can change how bright or dim the subject looks, opening and closing the lens can control how bright or dim a given subject looks. Now, there's also a creative effect. The lens opening that you use, whether you pick it or whether the camera's doing it automatically, can influence the visual look of your pictures. If you have a wide lens opening, particularly if you're relatively close to a subject, not shooting something a mile away or whatever, you will tend to see that very little is in focus, that you can focus on a foreground element and the backgrounds are really kind of blurred and out of focus. And conversely, if we choose a small lens opening, we can get a lot more in sharp focus. So we can very visibly change the look of our pictures by just deliberately saying, I'm going to work with a wide lens opening, a medium lens opening, or a small lens opening. We'll get into actually applying that. Now, this is one thing that throws people off and kind of makes people either come to classes like this or just say, ah, to heck with it, I'm just going to leave the camera on the green zone, is the way we gauge how wide or narrow small the lens opening is with a series of numbers that we call f-stops. And what scares people away is that the numbers are in what appears to be a totally random sequence. Not just 1, 2, 3, 4, or 2, 4, 6, 8 or something, but this random sequence. There is a mathematical reason for it. It's one of those things that I knew back when I was in high school or whatever, and I couldn't tell you now if you put a gun to my head. But the bottom line is that, number one, these numbers are consistent throughout photography. So this isn't a Canon thing or a different brand thing. These numbers mean the same thing. If we were to go out and shoot pictures out in front of B&H after this event, and I told you, take this picture at f11, and I'm using a Canon and you're using a different brand camera, f11 means the same thing for me as it does for you. The lower the number, the wider an opening we're describing. And conversely, of course, the higher that F number, when we get into F16, F22, and beyond, you can have higher numbers depending on the lens and so on. We're talking smaller openings. So I know it sounds a little backwards, but basically the wider the lens is, the more light it's letting in, the lower the F number is that's describing how wide or narrow that opening is. Now, once again, that's indicated right in your viewfinder. It's a second set of digits in a Canon camera. So you see the shutter speed, you see the lens openings from left to right. So, right there, two very important things to be cognizant of. One of the big things that separates people who have started to transition into being photo enthusiasts from the folks who are kind of getting their feet wet and they're still kind of taking snapshots is awareness. Doesn't mean that you have to sit up nights studying all kinds of complex technical stuff or whatever, but it does mean that they are aware. They're aware of what they're seeing in their viewfinder. They're aware of their compositions and how they're using the frame. This isn't a class about composition, but they're aware of that kind of thing, and they're also aware of their basic camera settings. They're aware of what shutter speed the camera's reporting in a given situation. They're aware of the lens opening the camera's reporting, and they can kind of put the two together and get a sense of, all right, if I shoot a picture with at these settings, this is probably the look I'm going to get. And then weigh and assess. Is that going to work for me? Maybe, maybe not. There's a third setting, and that is the ISO, which is basically the camera's, it's a numerical rating for the camera's sensitivity to light. How sensitive is the imaging sensor to light? We had this with film back in the film days as well. The only difference was we couldn't just change a film sensitivity willy-nilly. If we wanted to shoot with a different sensitivity, we had to take that film out of the camera and put a different roll of film in that was more sensitive or less sensitive. Basically, if we're shooting in bright sunlight, we don't need a heck of a lot of light sensitivity in our film or today our imaging sensors. Low sensitivity is fine when there's a lot of light. So in bright sunlight or whatever, low ISO numbers like 100, 200, things like that, perfectly fine. The higher the number, the more sensitive we're telling the camera's imaging sensor to be to incoming light. So in lower light situations, dark overcast, dusk, dawn, deep shade, night, we're going to want to use higher ISO numbers. So it's not uncommon in today's world to be using ISOs like 800 and above. What you're going to find is that ISO is literally a vehicle to get you the settings you want in a given situation. Shooting action pictures like this, and we'll get into this more, so we're not going to just drop this on you and leave it now. Shooting action pictures like this tennis player, you want a good sharp picture of a moving subject, means a fast shutter speed. But this guy is not in sunlight. This is a night tennis match. Not a lot of light. Even though you may be in what looks like a well-lit stadium or arena or whatever, it's a heck of a lot less light than the sun. So how do we get that? Use a high ISO. Conversely, you may be out in the daytime where there's plenty of light, and you may say to yourself, hey, for a creative effect, I want to do a deliberate blur. That means a slow shutter speed. The shutter's open for a relatively long time. I don't want to wash the picture out with too much light coming in. No. A lower ISO would be the vehicle to let us do that in a lot of situations. So again, we have conventional ISO numbers, and if you look, you'll notice that starting over on the left, if you start at 100, you go to ISO 200, you've doubled the number. That's one stop difference in sensitivity. Go to 400, we've doubled the number again, another stop. The difference from these main ISO settings, 100, 200, 400, is once again, we're either cutting the amount of sensitivity in half or doubling it. Same as we were doing with shutter speeds, and frankly, those lens apertures I showed you, same thing there. So in today's world, with today's digital cameras, we normally think of ISOs such as 400 and lower as low or maybe moderate ISOs, everyday kind of ISOs that we typically use for many situations. With today's cameras, and this is one of the biggest advances in the industry, I'm not talking just Canon now, but the whole industry, if we look at what's happened over the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years in interchangeable lens cameras, we're seeing better and better performance in terms of image quality as the ISOs get higher than we did back in olden times, so to speak. So if we talk ISOs roughly 800 to about 3200, most enthusiasts would agree that we can call those moderate to high ISOs. And again, in today's world, if we were to go into ISOs above, let's just say roughly 3200, 6400 and above, we can consider those like extremely high ISOs. Generally, we think of those as things we'd use in very low light to give us lots of sensitivity when there just isn't much light available to get a picture. Now, as I said a moment ago, but it bears repeating, understand that if you're working at a low ISO, you will tend to be using slower shutter speeds. Camera's not as sensitive to light, so it needs more light coming in. Shutters need to be open longer, everything else being equal. And or wide lens openings. It'll tend to throw backgrounds out of focus and so on. So if we work at ISOs like 100 or 200 or whatever, that'll often be the case. And conversely, if we work at higher ISOs, we can expect that we're going to be working at faster shutter speeds, which could be useful if we want to freeze movement or whatever. And or we tend to be working at smaller lens openings. It'll get more sharpness front to back in our pictures. Now, there's nothing to say. Don't connect the dots and form too straight a line here. I'm not saying that if you want a shot with a lot of sharpness front to back, you have to be at ISO 3200. I'm just using that as an example to illustrate the point, that a higher ISO is a vehicle to get you there when you say to yourself, I'd like a lot of sharpness in this picture front to back. Many of our cameras today, not just Canon again, but in the industry, have ISOs that you can have the camera automatically set them, which even a lot of enthusiast photographers are finding is a great feature. The camera itself, you can set one or both of the other settings, depending on just how you like to work the camera, and the camera itself will set the ISO automatically to match just based on how much light it sees. So what it means is that the camera will tend to set lower ISOs when you're shooting in bright daylight situations. It'll tend to raise the ISOs automatically without you having to do it yourself when you're in low light situations. And you're always free to set it manually if you want to. On a Canon camera, that means you're going to press a button that's marked ISO and then usually turn the top, what we call on the Canon cameras, a main dial. On competitive cameras, it may be a little different, but the process is very similar most of the time. Now, so you have a shutter speed, you got a lens aperture, you have an ISO. 3 fundamental settings, and there's nothing new about this in the digital age. Like I said, we've had this for about 160, 170 years in photography. Here's where it starts to get interesting. I'm sure everybody in the room and everybody who's watching us online can grasp that a fast shutter speed means less light's coming through and we can freeze a moving subject. And a slower shutter speed, the shutter's open longer, more light's coming through, and if there is movement in the scene, it'll tend to be recorded as a blur. And in terms of lens apertures, we open the lens up, more light comes in, we throw backgrounds out of focus, and conversely, we pick a higher F number, a smaller opening, we can get more things in sharp focus. But if you understand what the visual effects of shutter speeds and lens openings can be, that difference in what's in focus and what's depicted sharply, front to back, and that business of how is any motion being depicted. Now you can start to think like a photographer. I'm going to show you a series of pictures here, and I'm going to ask you, let me back up for a second. In most photographic situations, if you really have a deliberate look that you're after, and I repeat, you won't always have a deliberate look you're after. There are times you're just looking to just record something quickly and just take a snapshot or whatever, and you don't really care. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But part of being a creative photographer is looking at a scene and saying, I want to depict this way. That's up to you. That's as personal as a fingerprint. But to do that, one of these settings has to be boss. One of these settings, 90% of the time or more when you're of that frame of mind, one of these settings is going to be the dominant thing that you got to get right, and you let the other stuff kind of fall into place. So I'm going to show you some pictures, and I'm going to ask you folks, which, you can just sort of shout out your answers here. Which setting do you think would be the one that I would, as a photographer, want to be in charge of to get a particular look? Shutter speed, lens aperture, or an ISO? They're all important, but one of them sometimes needs to be boss. Shot like this one, telephoto lens, depicting an old building down in Soho. What would be the most important thing?
Aperture.
Yeah, that's right. The first thing is, in this particular case, we wanted to get sharpness, if we could, front to back. Sometimes the laws of physics just don't work for us to do that, but when we're back far away like this with a telephoto lens, usually we can pull this kind of thing off. So, bottom line is, hey, to get that look, before anything else, I got to be working with a fairly small lens opening, a high f number. And in this case, it was shot at f11, which is a relatively small opening. That's going to give me more sharpness front to back. That is the dominant thing I got to be thinking of if I wanted to, you know, get this effect in another picture, or in this particular one in this case. There's nothing moving in that picture. It doesn't really matter if I shoot it, as long as I can hold the camera steady. It doesn't really matter whether I shoot that picture at 125th of a second or a 2,000th of a second. As long as I'm able to hold it steady, that's fine. What's going to matter visually is the aperture. How about this one? Just shout it out. There you go. Same thing. It's a lens aperture. The effect is different. Now we're talking a shot where we're using a telephoto lens again, zeroing in on this young lady at a memorial service, and there isn't much in the background behind her, but we wanted to make sure that whatever there wasn't competing for visual attention, that we put focus on her and everything else just kind of falls out of focus. You've all seen this effect, I'm sure, a million times before in magazines and so on. Setting a wide aperture was job one. Once again, ask yourself, is there movement in the scene I have to be aware of? Not really. She's standing still. Not really. She's not waving her arms around. She's holding the flag there in a very stationary kind of posture. Shutter speed isn't a big deal here. Again, as long as I've got a fast enough speed that I'm not going to mess things up by shaking the camera. The minimum shutter speed for safe hand holding you never can lose track of. But once you're past that, then it's, hey, I want a wide aperture for this one to get that look. That's the key. We want to get a certain look. How about a shot like this? There you go. Exactly. In this case, it's pretty obvious. And again, I know you all have seen images like this before, the depiction of water moving, but at a slow shutter speed gives us that kind of feathery looking blur, which is kind of neat. And one of the cool things, this really sort of points to one of the cool things about photography in general, because there are times, even in a relatively simple shot like this, and I'm sure you could get, just taking a hike in a state park or something like that, one of the cool things is, this is a picture, our eyes never see things quite this way. The camera can, our naked eyes do not. Our eyes certainly can see the water moving, but they don't see it this way. The camera gives the viewer something that their naked eye hasn't seen. So yes, a slow shutter speed, in this case a half a second, gave us that sort of feathery rendering of the water. This is an interesting one. You want to take this picture? Who said that? Absolutely. There you go. The first step here, it's low light. Okay, just lit by a couple of candles or whatever. Okay. Job one, I want to get a sharp picture of this little dude. And that means, if nothing else, I got to make sure I'm at a sufficiently fast shutter speed that I don't shake the camera. And low light is one of those situations where I got to be wary of too slow a shutter speed. Again, I'm not talking for the most part in this discussion about using tripods and that kind of thing. They're great. If you use one and enjoy using it, keep right on doing it. I'm not telling you don't. But our discussion is mainly about just practical handheld photography. the first thing we got to do is start cranking our ISOs up to a higher sensitivity so that the camera is more sensitive to light. There isn't a heck of a lot of light there. Get us the safe enough shutter speeds that I can work freely, and then we can go to town. I'm not too concerned about the lens aperture here. I want to make sure the focus is on him. It isn't really important if, the candles and the cake are in focus. Even if his arm in the foreground is a little out of focus, it's not like we're shooting a fashion advertisement or something where we got to get everything tack sharp. We're getting a shot at a little guy. So that's job one. Another interesting one. Take a look at this for a minute and tell me, what's the most important thing? And what else? Yeah. Now, if you shot this picture yourself, you would know that you were in an indoor arena. Since none of us were, except myself, were present when the shot was taken, you can take a moment and look. And I mean, we can see by the background, this isn't outdoors on a playground at high noon. This is an indoor arena with indoor arena lighting. And now that lighting may seem a heck of a lot brighter than the lighting in your old high school gym or something, but believe me, it's a lot less light than what we'd have in the sun. So, it's an action subject. We gotta get a fast enough shutter speed to freeze it. In this case, a 500th of a second will do the trick. But that also means, since we're not outdoors, we gotta make sure that ISO is up there fast enough, high enough that we can get that fast shutter speed. Is this all making sense? Yes. Okay. ISO is a vehicle to get you where you need to be when either of the other two settings matters. There's another one. Which would be the most important thing here? Yeah, just the shutter speed. Exactly. In this case, a 4,000th of a second was used to freeze, all the water droplets and everything else of this guy on the Wave Runner. And this was outdoors in sunlight. Plenty of light, so ISO wasn't a big consideration. We could use a lower ISO, like 200, 400, maybe even 100, and still get that fast shutter speed because we're in sunlight. So there are going to be times where one setting or the other is boss for a couple of minutes. You see a scene, you want to depict it a certain way, one or the other may matter to you. And it's important to be able to just tell the camera, okay, I need a fast shutter speed. Or to tell the camera, hey, I want a small lens aperture because I want lots and lots of stuff in focus. That wouldn't be the case in this picture. I'm just saying hypothetically in a different scenario. The interesting thing is, you've probably gleaned this already, there are lots of different combinations of shutter speeds and lens apertures that you can use and still get a properly exposed picture. Take a shot like this one, taken with a telephoto lens, just a shot of a country road. We obviously focused on the stop sign. Look at the background's recognizable, but it's still soft and out of focus because we shot it at a wide lens opening, and you can see the settings were something like a 500th of a second with a wide opening of f2.8. That threw that background out of focus. That's fine if what we wanted to do was kind of show the country road, but kind of have it be soft and out of focus as well for a visual effect. But take a look at this next one. Shot at a small lens opening. Here's the thing. The effect, the visual look is different, but the exposure didn't change. The picture didn't get lighter or darker in this case because we changed the lens opening, but look what we did to the shutter speed. We changed that too. We slowed the shutter way down to let enough light in to counter that smaller opening. Same amount of light ended up on the digital imaging sensor. We got two images with the same brightness. Let me go back and forth and you can see. Here's the first one, wide open at a 500th of a second. Here's the second one. Lens stopped all the way down to f22, a lot more in focus, but the brightness didn't change. What that means is that when you are out there taking pictures, you're not limited to any one particular shutter speed or lens opening or even ISO. You got like lots of choices that'll work. Now don't let this scare you. It doesn't mean that, oh, every time I go to take a picture, I got to stop and pull out a book and think, okay, what effect do I want exactly? As you start working with it, it becomes easier and easier to do. And one of the cool things is that you can keep your camera in an automatic exposure mode. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And you can quickly go from a wide aperture like an f2 to a small aperture like an f22, and the camera will just automatically change the shutter speed for you, which is really convenient. You can just say to the camera, hey, one moment a wide opening was what I was looking for to throw backgrounds out of focus. You see that a lot in portraits and stuff. It's a great look. And then there's other times when you're photographing, it doesn't have to be a landscape. It could be just you want to get a good sharp picture of a car in your driveway, but you want the whole thing to be sharp front to back. Take that picture at f11 or f16 or something. Let the camera just automatically pick a slower shutter speed. It doesn't have to be all like work. Let's take a little step back for a second. What happens when we shoot pictures in the green zone? Now, this is one of those instances where what I'm telling you is what happens with a Canon brand camera. I'm pretty confident that it's very similar with other brands, but I just want to distinguish that it's possible under the hood that some other camera companies may be doing some things a tiny bit differently, so just keep that in mind. But with a Canon camera, if I take the camera and I put it in the green auto mode, the green zone, it looks like, hey, take the camera out of the box, ooh, one of these is green, that must mean that's where I put it. This is what happens. I go to take a picture, the camera, as I tap the shutter button, the light meter in the camera goes on, the camera reads the amount of light in the scene, is it bright, is it dark, etc. And then, here's what it does in its own little mind. It knows the lens I have on the camera. And it also knows if it's a zoom lens, if I zoomed into a telephoto setting, am I backed off to a wide setting or whatever. So it understands the first step in countering that camera shake phenomenon. I'm not saying you'll never get it, but it factors that in. So the first thing it does is it sets a shutter speed that's fast enough to give me safe hand holding, or what it thinks is safe hand holding. At the same time, knowing the brightness, knowing the shutter speed it needs, it adjusts the ISO to give me an ISO that'll let it do this comfortably. And then it usually is going to set a fairly moderate lens opening, maybe close the lens down a little bit to give me a little more sharpness front to back, that kind of thing. So, you may be thinking, well, oh, that's pretty cool. What's not to like? And it's absolutely true that if we're just taking snapshots, and in particular, if we don't care visually about the effect of a particular shutter speed or lens opening, that concept works fine. So hey, when I got a beer in one hand and a camera in the other, and I'm taking snapshots of the 4th of July picnic of my buddies goofing off in the backyard or something, I'm probably not thinking of, oh, I want to take a fine portrait here with the background beautifully out of focus or whatever. I'm just taking pictures of people goofing around. This probably would work fine. But they're gonna, and this is what brings people to classes like this, is you realize there's more out there in the real world and more inside your camera than just letting it do everything and hoping that you get something that looks good. So when you want a particular look in the picture, that's when you want to start taking the training wheels off and make at least one setting yourself. And again, I repeat what I said before. This does not mean that we go old school and do everything completely manually. You can, if you want. It's a good learning experience. But I'd be the last person in the world to tell you, oh, you should be doing everything on manual and set everything manually and use a separate handheld light meter. There's a time and a place for that kind of approach, but that is not what we're preaching here. What we're preaching here is what you can do with an entry-level camera, like a Canon EOS Rebel or anything similar. This is not something that requires you to go out and buy a fancy high-end camera. You can do it with that too, of course. But we're talking here about stuff that you can do with the gear you've got now. Now, one step is just understanding, and this probably ought to be rewarded because it isn't like there's a right exposure mode. You want to pick the one that's going to work best for you, for your thought process. It's going to just let you quickly make the settings you want to do. We'll explain each of these, so don't worry about the lingo for the moment. And in fact, we'll do that coming up right now. Again, I'm giving you the designation you'd see on a Canon camera. Competitive cameras have exactly the same kind of settings, but you may see slightly different designations on the camera. P on a Canon camera means you're in the program mode. And what that means is that the camera is automatically going to set the shutter speed and the lens opening for you based on the amount of light. So it'll, take a shot in the shade, it'll read the light in the shade and pick a combination of shutter speed and lens opening it thinks is appropriate. Turn around and point the camera in bright sun, it'll pick a different combination of shutter speed and lens opening it thinks are appropriate, and so on. You can set the ISO yourself and just lock it into one setting. You can not always change it whenever you want, but once you set it, it stays there until you go and change it. Or you can use the auto ISO and let the camera pick the ISO for you. And this isn't something that a lot of people do, but if you are in the program mode with a Canon camera, you can do what we call a program shift, which means you bring, with a camera at your eye, you just turn the top main dial, and you can literally tell it, hey, this one moment I want to work at a faster shutter speed or a smaller lens opening or whatever, and as you turn the dial, you're not lightening or darkening anything, but what you are doing is telling the system, hey, use a different combination of speed and lens opening than what the camera thought was right at first. Anyway, I think for many of us that's kind of a minor thing, but I wanted to just throw it out there. So, the camera sets the shutter speed and the lens opening automatically. I can set the ISO automatically if I want to. What's different compared to the green zone? It sounds just like the same thing. Well, the program mode actually has a few neat tricks up its sleeve. So even if you're in a situation taking those snaps in the backyard at the 4th of July picnic and you don't care about a particular lens opening or a fast enough shutter speed to freeze action or whatever, the program mode, first off, in a Canon camera, is going to give you access to all the menu settings. When you go out of the green zone and go into what they call the creative zone modes, the P, the TV, the AV, the M, you're telling the system, hey, basically open the toolbox and all the tools are out there ready. You can use any of them you want. All the custom functions are available. You can manually set your ISOs. You can pick your own focusing points and so on. Everything the camera is capable of doing suddenly opens up. When you use the camera in the green zone, again, I'm speaking about a Canon camera here. When you put a Canon camera in the green zone, it is deliberately simplified. The idea is casual, simple information and keep the casual amateur out of trouble so that he or she doesn't set something and all of a sudden all the pictures from Disney World come back, 2 stops overexposed or something. So the program mode still can be a good choice in situations where you may not really be after a particular lens opening or shutter speed, but you want that ability to lighten or darken, which is a very important creative thing, and have access, like I say, to all the other camera settings. So keep the program mode in mind as a kind of good setting if you want total automation, but you do want to be able to go in there and change things if you want to. Now, on a Canon camera, you'll see what the kind of confusing term on the mode dial, TV. It doesn't mean television. It's got nothing to do with television. It means time value or shutter priority mode. And the key thing here is this. All cameras with shutter priority work basically this way. You set a shutter speed. The camera will automatically adjust the lens opening. So I can point the camera in the sun, point it in the shade. It'll adjust lens openings in both cases. The shutter speed that I dialed in stays the same. And it'll warn you if you set a totally inappropriate shutter speed and it can't get a good exposure because things will blink on and off in the viewfinder. Again, you can set the ISO yourself if you want, or you could have it on automatic if you wanted to. So shutter priority is going to give you the ability to have automatic exposure, but still set a fast shutter speed when you want to freeze movement. And conversely, you can dial in directly a slow shutter speed when you know you want to show movement with deliberate blurring of some kind or other, a 30th of a second, a 15th of a second, the slower speeds where moving subjects are going to appear as kind of blurs and streaks. On a Canon camera, the AV mode is aperture priority. And that means that you are going to set a lens opening on the camera, a wide f-stop, a small f-stop, that is a high number but a small opening, or whatever. The camera will automatically adjust the shutter speed to give you what it thinks is a proper exposure for that opening. Think of that scene that I showed you a moment ago with the stop sign and the lonely country road. Aperture priority is like perfect for a scene like that. I can set a wide opening and take one picture. I could just tell the camera, hey, now I want to do the same thing but with a small opening. So set a high F number, F22 or whatever, and bingo, it adjusted the shutter speed automatically. It's a great setting in a lot of situations. Certainly, you can preset a small lens opening when you know you want lots of sharpness front to back. Relatively high F numbers like 11 or 16, even 22. And when you want that portrait look with a blurred background, you can set a low F number, a wide opening. Focus on your foreground subjects, your backgrounds get depicted much more softly. Wide openings with low numbers like F4. If your lens will allow it, even lower openings will let more light in. The lower F numbers, the wide lens openings, are great when you're working in low light, handheld. And then you have the manual mode. And what that means is that you set the shutter speed, you set the lens opening. Traditionally, it meant you also set the ISO. Many of the cameras now, you can put the ISO on automatic and you can tell the system, hey, I want to shoot at a fast shutter speed and a wide lens opening, and just vary the ISO so that if I point it in the shade or point it in the sun, I don't have to do anything else. So auto ISO with manual exposure can actually be kind of neat in some situations. But understand, manual exposure means you're setting a shutter speed, you're setting a lens opening. You're defining the look in your pictures, whether you really intend to or not. And you have a metering scale in the viewfinder when you're in manual that tells you when the camera thinks you're properly exposed and when it thinks that you're not. Proper exposure, of course, would be when that little index, for lack of a better phrase, we can call it a needle, even though it literally isn't. When that little indicator is right in the middle, the camera thinks you're properly exposed at whatever shutter speed and lens opening you picked for whatever the light is that you're pointing it at. So you got these three settings. You got different ways of working with them with these different exposure modes. Let's talk about using these exposure modes in different situations. And I repeat what I said at the beginning. It isn't so much a matter of, oh, well, I'm going to memorize what each of these modes does, and I'm going to, when I take pictures of, my kids playing around the pool, it's going to be this mode, and when I take, pictures of, Aunt Matilda standing by the pool, I'm going to switch to this mode. You can do that if you want, but photography isn't about making things difficult. It should be about making things easy, but still being able to apply your own creativity to situations. So don't feel like you gotta keep changing modes back and forth. Understand what they do, and then find a route that works for you, that you can quickly tell the camera, hey, I want this. Any of them will do it. It's just a matter of which kind of speaks your language the best. We talked about the program mode, and again, think of it as something that'll give you the automatic exposure, and in situations where otherwise you just don't really care about the effect of a shutter speed or a lens opening. That could be taking snaps. It could be in situations where you got things that really aren't moving. Just kind of casual situations where you just want to get a good shot and there isn't a lot going on, things aren't going extremely fast or whatever. The program mode can actually work kind of fine. It can be great if you just want to hand the camera to a friend or somebody who's not really a skilled photographer, and you just say, hey, take a couple pictures of me in front of my house here or whatever it is. Rather than you could preset everything if you wanted to, but sometimes it's easier just put the camera in program and just let it make the decisions for you. The shutter priority mode, again, on a Canon camera it'll say TV. If you use a different brand of camera, it may say S or SP or something like that instead of TV. But the whole idea is motion control. Do I want to freeze motion? Do I want to blur motion? And this can be actually very useful for starters to just lock in a safe minimum speed to handhold the camera. If you're in situations, particularly in falling light levels, where you don't have really fast moving subjects, but that funny looking guy from Canon was talking all about safe handheld shutter speeds and getting good sharp pictures, you could dial in a shutter speed of a 60th or 125th or whatever and know that, hey, I can point the camera here, I can point the camera there, and no matter what, with the lens I'm using, I got a fast enough shutter speed that I don't have to worry about jiggling the camera, all else being equal. But there are times that we want to input shutter speeds for reasons beyond just getting a safe handheld picture. If we got moving subjects, shutter priority makes it very easy to just set a shutter speed. It can be a fast speed to freeze movement. It could be a slower speed to give us deliberate blur. This is what we call a panned shot. So I'm sure you've all seen this kind of thing before. What we're doing is literally as the motorcycle's going by, we're moving the camera along with it, trying to kind of keep it, nice and centered and all that. And in this case, at 125th of a second, it's a slow enough speed that we've got, some blur going on in the background there. You can see the kind of streakiness in the background. You can see that the wheels are moving, the disc brakes are, moving and all that. So it gives us that sense of speed and motion, but the subject itself is still relatively well outlined because we stayed with it. It's called a panning movement. But the bottom line here isn't so much the panning technique. The bottom line is understanding that shutter priority gives you that direct input of shutter speed. If you're saying to yourself, the shutter speed's the dominant thing I want to work with here, you can just set the shutter speed you want, camera set the right lens opening, and you're good to go. Anytime you're working with your shutter speeds, whether you're in shutter priority or anywhere else, keep in mind that exposure is something you never can forget. In bright lighting situations, here's a shot taken certainly in daylight, you're going to tend to be using the faster shutter speeds to keep too much light from coming in and washing out your picture. And conversely, in low light, you will tend to be working at slower shutter speeds, letting more light into the camera, all else being equal. I don't want to do too much of a selling job on you, but the aperture priority mode is one that is a real sweet spot for a lot of experienced photographers. That doesn't necessarily mean it should be the right one for you, but just work with me on this for a second. I set the camera in aperture priority. I can tell it right on the camera. I dial in, hey, here's the lens opening I want to work with. I want to work with a wide opening. I want to work with a small opening. And again, keep in mind what that's going to do visually in some cases. A wide opening means that I may have a blurry background, with background's just out of focus. I got a sharp subject in the foreground and my background's out of focus. I can tell the camera, hey, I want a small lens opening to get more in focus. Shot like this one. And it'll, dutifully pick a small lens opening and adjust the shutter speed automatically to match it. Aperture priority is cool in a couple of ways. And again, I'm not trying to twist anybody's arm here. I'm not here to tell you this is what you should be doing. But a lot of photographers have found it a very effective way to work. Because I can deliberately pick an aperture that I think is going to work to give me good sharpness front to back in landscape pictures and close-up shots. That becomes a very critical thing because for technical reasons, when we get close to small objects, with any lens, less and less seems to be in sharp focus. So just to get a whole flower in focus, you sometimes have to work at it. Certainly it can be cool in very bright lighting conditions too to pick a small lens opening with a high number, again like an f16 or 22 or something. And again, I can get the aperture, I can use the aperture to get a look that matters in some cases. I can get a wide aperture and throw backgrounds out of focus with a low number, a wide opening, and so on. And of course, a wide opening is going to let more light into the camera, so if I'm shooting in a dimly lit situation, I got a better chance of just getting the picture in the first place. But here's another cool thing about aperture priority, and that is, as I open the lens up, that is set a lower f number, a wider opening, as you progressively open the lens up, the camera's setting the shutter speed automatically. And when you open the lens up, it's going to set faster shutter speeds. So a lot of action photographers who know, hey, I need a fast shutter speed to get a sharp picture, will use aperture priority, preset a wide lens opening, again, a low f number, whatever low number their lens allows, and know that they're going to get the fastest shutter speed that the camera thinks is appropriate given the lighting and the ISO setting they're using. So you actually see a lot of sports photographers using aperture priority mode to get to the shutter speed that they want automatically. And that works in reverse too. You can set a wide opening and know that, hey, I'm going to get the fastest shutter speed the camera thinks I can get at this ISO, freeze moving subjects and all that. Great. What if you want movement? Hey, just pick a small lens opening. F11, F16 or whatever. You'll see the shutter speed in the viewfinder, and you can, if you're saying to yourself, hey, I'd like to get deliberate blur for a visual effect, it's as easy as just picking a fairly small lens opening and just watching the shutter speeds in your viewfinder. And when you get to a speed you think, this should work. I think this was like at a 30th or 15th of a second or something. Bingo, you're ready to roll. Manual mode kind of gets oversold, I think, by some traditional experienced photographers. If you've been around the block with other photographers for any length of time, you've no doubt run into those who say, oh, well, I shoot everything, manual, manual's better, that kind of thing. And it's no better or worse than anything else. I mean, it's as good as your ability to properly judge and set exposure in a given situation. The cool thing about manual, and this is where I would recommend you keep it in your back pocket as a tool that maybe you pull out from time to time, is that once you set the exposure, it won't change until you go in and change something. Now, you may be thinking, well, what difference does that make? We run into this kind of situation sometimes. There's a night football game, 2 high school teams, and we got a team in white uniforms. We got a team in dark uniforms, same game. Automatic exposure is based on just basically how much light is being reflected off the subjects into the camera's metering system. And I will bet you a cup of coffee at Starbucks or your place of choice that when you go from something like this a moment later to shooting the other team with dark navy blue uniforms, the camera's going to change exposure a little bit if you're in aperture priority or shutter priority, because it's saying, whoa, there's not as much light coming into the camera with these dark uniforms as there was a moment ago when we were shooting the team with the white uniforms. With manual exposure, once you set it, it doesn't change. It doesn't care whether you're shooting the team in white, the team in navy blue, or the referees in striped shirts for that matter. So that is a reason that you may want to consider from time to time using manual exposure. I'm not telling you, like I say, that manual is just ipso facto better, but one cool thing is that automatic exposure, it's in the word. It'll automatically try to change anytime it sees little changes in how much light there is. If I was sitting here with a camera right now and I pointed it at these folks sitting toward the front, they have some light falling on them, and then I just moved the camera a little bit so it started to include a little more people, sitting midway back, not as much light on them, the exposure is going to change. That's what automatic exposure is all about. Usually that's a good thing. Situations like this, that can mess you up. So manual can be actually a kind of cool tool in those situations. So just kind of keep that in mind. The bottom line, though, is we're talking about exposure modes. If you've got a visual effect in mind, you can get there with any exposure mode. So the main thing is finding a place you feel comfortable working. I already did a selling job on you and told you that many, not all, but for sure, but a lot of experienced photographers who want the convenience of automatic exposure have found a home with aperture priority. You may feel, hey, that could be cool, but the concept of shutter priority works better for me. If that's the case, take it and run with it. In any of these exposure modes, I'll leave manual out of it for a moment. Any of these exposure modes, one very, very, very important thing about getting out of the green zone and going into something that gives you some more control is that you have the ability to use exposure compensation. You can deliberately lighten and darken your pictures. This is big. Because as good as the metering systems are in today's cameras, there are going to be times where just because of tricky lighting or whatever, you take the first picture and you look at it, and I'm sure you've all had this experience, you look at it on the LCD monitor. Look, we know the LCD monitor is not a big 30-inch color calibrated, desktop monitor or something like that. But it's close enough that we can get an idea. I'm sure everybody in this room is taking a picture from time to time and you look at it and you say, dang, that's too light, that's kind of dark, or whatever. Oftentimes, it is. And if that's the case, we need to go in and lighten it. On a Canon camera, if you're in the green zone, it won't let you do that. So that's a big reason to consider going at least to the program mode, which is still totally automatic, as we said, because it gives you the ability now to go in and lighten and darken the next picture you take. Just so you can see the process on a Rebel model, you push the AV button, the plus minus button on the back, and hold it in and turn the main dial on top of the camera. On higher end Canon cameras, you're going to be working with a dial on the back of the camera, no button you have to push first, so just as long as the camera's awake, just turn that, what we call a quick control dial on the back, and you instantly are lightening or darkening your picture. So what that means is that, again, you shoot a picture and it just ain't right. You can go in and, if you need to lighten it, you can do that with the exposure compensation. And understand, of course, this doesn't change the first picture you took. It just means that the next picture you take will be deliberately lighter if you go on the plus side of the scale, or darker if you go on the minus side of the scale. And this works in reverse too. A lot of people sort of don't think about this. It works in reverse too. Because if you shoot something that is dark, what we got here is a black wrought iron fence, and the background behind it is, you could say that it was gray, but I guarantee you if you took a 4-year-old kid and asked him, what color is that background there, the kid would say black. It's such a dark shade of charcoal gray, it might as well be black. This is what the camera thought was proper exposure. And if it looks like it's a little washed out, it's only because it is. What the camera did just didn't turn out right. So we've got the ability to go in and, again, compensate and deliberately get the effect we want. Sometimes we do that just simply to get the exposure right. Sometimes we do it for a creative effect, you know, to get a silhouette deliberately or whatever. But exposure compensation is huge. People who are good with their cameras are good with exposure control. This isn't a class on literally metering and exposure control, but understand that by just simply taking the training wheels off and getting out of the green zone and going into the program mode, the aperture priority mode, or the shutter priority mode, we've still got the convenience of automatic exposure, but now we got a lot more control over the look of our pictures, and then also the exposure part of the look of our pictures. Do we want it lighter? Do we want it darker? Whatever. And that same scale, of course, is visible in the manual mode. So in manual mode, we could just mismatch the settings and just move the little needle off to the side, to the plus side or the minus side, as we choose. We talked about a shutter speed, a lens opening, the ISO. Let's go back and take a little deeper look at them to give you a little more insight. And this is beyond just, okay, fast shutter speeds mean you'll freeze movement and that kind of thing. And I want to start with the ISO because, again, that is your bridge. Whether the camera sets it automatically or you set it yourself, changing the ISO means you can have access with certain limits, but within a very broad range of situations, you can have access to the fast or slow shutter speed you may think you want for a particular picture, or the wide or the small lens opening you may think you want for a particular picture. As we said before, you can let ISO be set automatically by the camera, or you can set it yourself. Just to repeat, you know, of course, in low light situations, you're going to tend to use the high ISO numbers to get the right exposure and then to get fast enough shutter speeds to just avoid camera shake. And of course, when there's lots of light, you want to use lower ISO settings most of the time. But let's look at this and think about, okay, what is the typical thought process that a knowledgeable photographer would do as far as, okay, I'm going to a botanical garden, this is the first thing I see that made me want to pick my camera up and take a picture of it. Fine. Okay, what is the thought process in terms of what ISO do I use? The first thing you got to ask is the scene brightly or dimly lit? Because that's going to define a lot right there. If this is in absolutely pure sunlight at high noon on a totally clear day in Phoenix, Arizona, there's a lot of light there. In all likelihood, we're not going to be using a high ISO. A low ISO is going to be fine. And you know, conversely, if this is indoors in a greenhouse or something on a cloudy day, not a lot of light, we may want to boost the ISO up. So that's the first thing: is the scene brightly lit or not? Just ask yourself. Then okay, you make an initial assessment. Is that gonna give me a safe handheld shutter speed? Because you may have read all kinds of thoughtful accounts online and whatnot where people say, oh, the lower ISO numbers give you better image quality, less noise and all that, and that's absolutely true. So if you think to yourself, okay, self, I'm going to try ISO 100 because that should give me excellent quality and all that, part of that's good. But if you pick the camera up to your eye and tap the shutter button and you see that the shutter speed the camera is going to give you is an eighth of a second or something, it's like, okay, hold the phone. We got to do something a little different here. So the safe handheld shutter speed never can be far from your attention. Remember, I said a lot of this is awareness. And the safe handheld shutter speed with an otherwise basically stationary subject and so on has to be part of your thought process. If you forget it and don't think about it, you will start getting pictures that look like that brick building that I showed you about 30 minutes ago, where it's all streaky and everything, and you're wondering, oh God, what the heck did I do wrong? And then, as far as ISO, whatever I thought was the right place to start, and it's flexible, we can always change it, but is that going to give me the final shutter speed I need? Because the final shutter speed that I really need to take the picture at may be different than what's a safe handheld speed. Safe handheld speed probably is all that matters in a case like this with this flower, assuming it's not moving in the breeze or whatever. Okay? Shot like this one, totally different. This one, an action shot taken with a long telephoto lens, we're going to need a fast shutter speed to get a sharp picture there. There's no two ways about that. And no matter what ISO gives me the best quality or whatever, I'm going to be way above the safe handheld threshold in terms of a fast shutter speed to get a good picture here. A thousandth of a second, a 2,000th of a second, something like that. So, is the ISO going to give me the shutter speed that I need if the shutter speed matters? Case like this, it matters. If I was taking just a portrait of this young lady standing perfectly still, a super fast shutter speed might not matter in the sense of freezing motion. Now, it matters in terms of shutter speed, it matters in terms of lens aperture too. Not every situation is one where I need a fast shutter speed. But I may go into it and say to myself, self, for the look I'm looking for, I want a particular lens aperture. The lens aperture is what needs to be boss in this picture. So I need a fairly small lens opening to make sure I got good sharpness front to back and so on. An f11, f16, something like that. Will the ISO I'm working at let me do that and still not cripple me with too slow a shutter speed on the other end? So you go to take a picture like this at an f16 or an f22 where the lens opening is really teeny, not a lot of light's coming through the lens. Even though we got sun coming into the camera, obviously, you may find that you have to move the ISO up 400, 800, whatever it takes. ISO is a bridge to get you where you want to be. So it's you use it as you need to. Now, I touched on this before. We'll show you a little, just one graphic representation of it. It's absolutely true that as you start going into higher ISOs, 1600, 3200, 6400, and beyond on some of these cameras, you're going to start to get more visible noise in your pictures. Noise is kind of that salt and pepper effect that you see when you look close at your pictures. I'll give you a little example on screen. I know it's sort of tough to see sometimes on the monitors, but you take a shot like this one and we look at just one little teeny area of it and we're going to blow that up at different ISOs. At an ISO like 1600, which again is considered a sort of a somewhat high ISO, and as the ISOs get higher, we expect we're going to start to see more imperfections in the image, more digital noise and so on. We can see that there's some noise in there. It's not too bad. One of the effects in a modern digital camera of noise is the camera, unless you have turned it off in the menu, which most people don't, and I probably wouldn't recommend you do most of the time, most of these cameras have what we call high ISO noise correction or noise reduction or whatever. Different companies will call it different things. We call it high ISO noise reduction. As the ISOs get progressively higher, the camera's smart enough to know what ISO we're working at. And it knows that, hey, at the higher ISOs, the camera's probably going to be producing more noise. So it actually goes through more processing steps to try to minimize that noise. That's a good thing, all else being equal. The catch is all else isn't equal. What happens is, in doing that, it often will start to attack fine detail that actually is in the picture. It becomes harder and harder for the system to distinguish between, when it sees differences in pixel brightness from one to the next to the next to the next, what's noise and what's actual detail. So here's a shot at 1600. Watch what happens when we start getting higher. 3200. Look at some of the details in the darker part of the building that isn't lit up. Get into 6400, and then to 12,800. And you can see it starts to break up somewhat. This is normal. I mean, it happens with all digital cameras. Some are better than others, admittedly, but it's a fact of life. As you get into higher ISOs, you're going to pick up more noise, and if you have noise reduction active in your camera, you're going to start to see some reduction of fine detail, being able to, see individual hairs on a person's head or count the bricks in the building or whatever it might be. Now, all that said, I am going to preach to you folks, don't be afraid to shoot at high ISOs. It is a great tool. Man does not live by ISO 100 alone. Be aware that all else being equal, you'll get better quality at the low ISO, so it's a good reason to use those when situations permit you to. But, people have said for a long time now, if you got a choice between a beautiful, smooth picture with no noise that's totally blurred from movement at 100 ISO or a sharp picture that has noise in it, 9 times out of 10, we'll take the sharp picture with the noise. So I encourage you to not just use high ISOs when you need to. I would frankly encourage each of you here, whether you like to shoot JPEG images in the camera or whether you like to shoot raw images, doesn't matter. I would encourage you, next time you're just sitting around in the house with nothing to do, take your camera, point it at the kitchen table or whatever it might be, and try a shot at 400 ISO, a shot at 800 ISO, a shot at 1600. Go all the way up to the top ISO your camera can do. And then look at those images in the computer and just see what the differences are. You obviously will see differences at the higher ISOs. Just know what the capabilities and the basic character of your camera's imaging sensor is, and know what your base, by looking at a little scale of, hey, okay, here's 400, here's 800, here's 1600, here's 3200, and so on, you can get a sense of, all right, here's my personal top threshold that I don't want to go over if I can help it. Maybe that's ISO 6400 or whatever, depending on the camera you have. It's very, very subjective, but ISO, again, is an important thing to be able to work with. And just understand, we're trying to take a little more detailed look here. Just understand that it isn't a free lunch, but it can be a great, great tool. Mentioned that some of the cameras have auto ISO, where it'll set it automatically, and it'll change as the lighting changes in the scene. So we can set the camera will set high ISOs in bright light, low ISOs in bright light, higher ISOs when the light is low. And here's the cool thing, the camera is also smart enough to know what shutter speed or lens opening is being set, whether you're setting it yourself or whatever. So as ISOs get faster, if we put the camera, for instance, in shutter priority, and we tell the system, all right, I was shooting at like 125th of a second when I was just taking pictures of these guys on the sideline. Now I'm taking action pictures. I know I need a fast shutter speed. Let's set like 1,000th of a second. Auto ISO is smart enough to know, all right, faster shutter speeds, we got to start raising the ISOs. So it basically is taking the next step for you. I'm not saying you should always be using it. I'm just saying that it is a great convenience when you want to work quickly. The same thing is true with small lens openings. Here's a macro shot at f4, and then if we take that same shot at f16, there's more sharpness front to back in that close-up subject. But the point is, the auto ISO changes. The auto ISO changed from the first shot. It picked a higher ISO in the second one, knowing that less light was coming in. Let's go back to shutter speeds, because it's such an important, fundamental part of getting out of the green zone, is understanding and being able to control and work with your shutter speeds in a thoughtful kind of way. I repeat, job one, as it says on screen, you got to be working at a safe enough speed that you can get sharp pictures. Because if you don't, the party's over. Beyond that, if you're shooting any kind of moving subject, normally, assuming you want a sharp depiction of it, normally, you want to be at least a 500th of a second, if not faster, 1/1000th of a second, 1/2000th of a second, or whatever. And if you can go faster, if you're in bright light and you can shoot this picture at a 2,000th of a second instead of a 500th of a second, assuming that stopping the action is the most important thing you want visually in this particular picture, do it. Fast shutter speeds with moving subjects are a nice combination as long as you have enough light. Now, those same fast shutter speeds mean that if you're shooting in low light, here's a high school football game at night, in a stadium at night. It's moving subjects. If we want sharp pictures, we still need that 1,000th of a second. To get that, we had to shoot this at ISO 6400. There isn't any way around it. When you tell, you tell your buddy that has the same camera that you do, you exchange emails or talk on the phone, later that week, and you say, oh, I shot these pictures at ISO 6400. They may say, oh my God, that's way too high an ISO. You're going to get all kind of noise and everything. It's like, look, you're working with a telephoto lens, wide open aperture, you want a fast shutter speed to freeze the action, and you got X amount of light. We can't have the stadium add more lighting or whatever. That ain't happening, not that night anyway. You got to use ISO as the bridge. You got to adjust the ISO to allow that shutter speed you need. End of story. It's a tool, so don't hesitate to use it. It can facilitate those fast shutter speeds in dim lighting conditions. There's a finite limit, of course. Now, again, talking about shutter speeds. Things that aren't moving real fast, you can often get away with slower speeds. Case like this. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that this isn't a speedboat or whatever. It's moving, but it's not moving like extremely rapidly. A speed like a 250th of a second or something with most lenses. I'm not talking about if we're working with a big 600 millimeter lens now or anything, but a typical zoom lens or whatever, the speed of a 250th of a second would be fine. 500th of a second maybe. Again, awareness is so important. You see these numbers in the viewfinder. The shutter speed, the lens openings are displayed all the time whenever your camera's awake. And just an awareness. You see that 250, it's like, you look at that scene, it's like, okay, you just quickly process. And believe me, if you do this on a regular basis, I'm not saying this as a pun, but it becomes almost an automatic process where you don't have to start thinking about it consciously. It's just sort of like you just find yourself, that's the scene, you look at what the camera's reporting, and if you see a 250th or a 500th, you just, without any further thought, you just say, go, green light, let's make it happen. And again, we can, intentionally blur things and get kind of interesting pictures. Once again, our eyes don't quite see things this way. We see the cars whizzing by, but they don't look like this to our naked eye. It's just a different look the camera gives us. Here, a slow shutter speed can actually be our friend. Even if you don't own a camera or lens with image stabilization, which, as I said, is a technology that'll help you work at slower shutter speeds, hand-holding, and still get sharp pictures. Even if your lenses don't have image stabilization, don't hesitate to try this from time to time. Now, one technique that they've been using for a long time, when you're working at a slow shutter speed, where you're kind of in that danger, maybe I'm going to shake the camera and get unwanted shake or whatever. One technique I've heard people say to try, and I've tried it myself and it has worked, is your camera has on the Canon side, what we call a drive setting. How fast will it shoot at one frame for every push of the shutter button? So even if I hold it down, it's just one picture, or will it shoot continuously? I'll hold the button down and click, 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 click. A lot of times in these situations where you're thinking, I want to try a 15th of a second, I want to try an 1/8 of a second, but you know that I'm on thin ice here, put the camera in continuous if you can, and hold the button down, take 3-4 shots. A lot of times one of those shots will be distinctly sharper in terms of things like these leaves and so on I'm talking about than the others. So shooting on continuous, I don't mean take like hundreds of shots, but just, to shoot like, 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, and a lot of times at those slow shutter speeds that otherwise would be kind of a, kind of a little bit of a red light, they can work for you. We talked about panning when we showed you that shot of the motorcycle. Slower shutter speeds being used to give us a sense of movement. Here, this car was barely moving. It was moving at like a slow walking pace in a parade, but a 60th of a second, we could get a little bit of that. More to the point, this gent on a motorcycle at 125th of a second, but we're panning with the subject. It's what under ordinary circumstances for a moving subject would be a slow shutter speed, but since we're moving the camera with them, we can get that sort of a little bit of blurring in the background, and we can see the blurring in the wheels and stuff like that. You can try this at even slower shutter speeds. A mistake a lot of photographers make when they try panning is they start at way slow shutter speeds, like a quarter of a second or a half a second or whatever. It's tough to do there. So with something like this guy's just on a mountain road in California. He's not like racing by or anything. He's probably going like 35, 40 miles an hour or something, if that. Try a speed like 125th of a second. Try a 60th of a second and just pan with them and see what kind of results you get. The hit rate when you pan, especially when you start, is never going to be 100%. You're going to have misses where, I didn't keep up with them and the whole bike is blurry or whatever. But it can be fun. Here's an example of what can happen if you do pan at a slower speed. That's an 1/8 of a second. And again, this isn't something you want to fill the family album with necessarily, but just, to get a different look of something. You see something and you just want to record it in a different way. It's an easy thing to do. It doesn't have to be a moving vehicle. It can be people walking by, walking their dogs in the park. It could be anything. Another way slow shutter speeds can be used is for long exposures. When we're talking about low light stuff at night, here's a shot at 1/10 of a second. That's still a shot, particularly if your lens has image stabilization. A wide angle lens with image stabilization, that's still a shot you can hand hold. Without image stabilization, go ahead and try it anyway. You may find that it works. Again, remember what I said about, maybe put the camera in the continuous setting and shoot several of those shots, not just one, because sometimes one out of that sequence will be distinctly sharper than the others. And then something like this, we're talking tripod time. 15 full seconds of long exposure is too much to ask any of us, as long as we got a pulse, to be able to hold the camera steady to get a sharp picture. But even if you don't have a tripod, if you can set the camera on anything solid, that could be something as mundane as a garbage can or something, you oftentimes can surprise yourself with the results that you can get. Again, the slow shutter speeds at night or in those kind of situations open up some neat visual doors. Let's take a closer look at lens apertures too, because there's more to lens apertures and thoughtfully selecting a lens opening that you think you're going to work with than just, okay, well, wide openings or those low f numbers, f2.8, f4 or whatever, and they throw backgrounds out of focus, and small lens openings with the high numbers like f16, f22 tend to get a lot more in sharp focus front to back. There's a little more to it than just that. Obviously, that's part of it. And when you want a scene where you want sharpness stem to stern, front to back, or whatever, the first thing you got to do is one way or another, whether you're setting it directly or the camera's setting it as a follow-up, like if you were in shutter priority mode where you're setting a shutter speed first, camera sets a lens opening, one way or another, you want to end up with a small lens opening, a high f number, when you want that sharpness front to back, f16, f22, or whatever. Now, there's a couple of other little sidebar things that these different lens openings can do that you can just keep in the back of your mind. If you set your lens to its smallest opening, or close to its smallest opening, again, highest f number, f22, whatever. If you've got something like the sun or other bright, what we call specular highlights in the picture, they'll be depicted as kind of like a star. There's an optical phenomenon going on in the lens where if you have a bright a pinpoint light source, it could be a car's headlights, it could be the sun obviously or whatever, you'll get a star effect by stopping the lens all the way down to its smallest opening, highest f number, or close to it. Shown people this picture and they say, oh, what star filter did you use or whatever, or did you do that in Photoshop or something? No, it's a straight shot at f22 with a wide angle lens, just looking right up into the sun. So small apertures, aside from just getting us more front to back sharpness, can sometimes do some other cool visual effects for us. Obviously, we're working at small apertures. All else being equal, we're going to tend to be working at slower shutter speed, so we got to watch that we're working at a safe enough speed to handhold safely, and that if there is any movement going on in the scene, that if it gets recorded as a blur, it's not going to mess us up. Now, obviously, a shot like this, that really isn't an issue, but it could be in other kinds of pictures where you might be looking for that. Now, here's another interesting thing to be aware of. I don't want you to sit up nights worrying about this, but it's something to just be cognizant of. And that is, with all lenses, and I don't care who makes the lens, I don't care how much money you paid for it. All lenses have a phenomenon that's aperture related called diffraction. And what diffraction is as you stop the lens down to progressively smaller openings, f11, f16, f22, if the lens will do it, f32. As the openings get smaller, you reach a point where the lens stops producing its sharpest image. Now, I'm not talking depth of field, that foreground to background sharpness. That you get more and more as you close the lens down for technical reasons. But in terms of just how sharp an image will it reproduce, if we're counting bricks on a building or counting eyelashes in a portrait, if you habitually take your pictures at the smallest lens opening, the highest f number, again like an f22 or something, you're not taking the sharpest pictures you can. You will get sharper images. If you were photographing something just flat like newsprint on a brick wall or something like that and shooting straight into it where there is no background and foreground to be concerned about, you're going to get your sharpest images usually with the f-stop somewhere toward the middle, not closed all the way down and not opened all the way up. Now, a lot of people overestimate the importance of that kind of sharpness. I repeat, it's not my place to sit up here and preach necessarily, but I repeat, don't wig out about this. If you got a situation like this shot here, where I knew what we wanted was a dark sort of semi-silhouetted look with that sun looking like a starburst. How do you get it? You get it at f22, okay? I understand that technically the detail in the building isn't quite as sharp as it would be if I'd shot this picture at f8 or f11. In this case, I don't care. Something in the picture needed to be boss. In that case, it was that star effect and so on, and we get that by stopping the lens down to f22. But just be aware, like I say, that technically at the smallest lens openings, your lens is not giving you the sharpest image that it can. A lot of times when you're shooting close-up images, you'll find you're often going to benefit from shooting at middle to small lens openings just to get sufficient amounts of your subject sharp. When you shoot with a macro lens, or you take your zoom lens and you zoom to your maximum telephoto setting on the lens and then focus to your closest distance to getting close on a flower or something like that, you're going to find in those kind of close-up situations of small objects that when you want good sharpness, from the antenna of the bug to the to its wings or whatever, small lens openings are the answer. But to the point that I made a moment ago about when you stop the lens all the way down to like f22 or whatever, the smallest opening, that you're losing a little bit of sharpness, you shoot a scene like this where detail is a big part of the message. There are two golden places with most lenses. I won't say every single lens, but most lenses. You shoot somewhere between f8 and f11, and you are going to get about the best the lens can deliver. So that is, if you're thinking about, okay, there's situations for wide lens openings, like when I want to throw the background out of focus in a portrait, and there's situations for small lens openings when I'm shooting that field out in the middle of nowhere and I want everything sharp from the foreground all the way to infinity. But when you just want detail and sharpness, think f8 to f11 with most lenses. Now there's exceptions. I mean, some lenses, the sweet spot's a little different, but f8 to f11, anywhere in that range, typically, it'll give you an image that's, with many lenses, is so darn sharp, you look at the picture and you feel like if you run your finger along it, you'd cut it. And basically what it harkens to is what I just said a moment ago. There's a difference between lens sharpness and depth of field, which is that term that means how much from foreground to background is sharp. They're not the same thing. Now, there's certainly plenty of reasons to consider shooting with your lens wide open or close to wide open. Gives us a totally different look. We've all seen this again, you know, in portraits, in fashion magazines, sports magazines, and a million other places, where we got a beautiful sharp subject in the foreground and the background is just thrown totally out of focus. It can be a very neat, creative look. One of the beauties of that look, that limited, what we call depth of field, limited range of sharpness, where we just got one thing in focus, we've preset a wide lens opening so the background start washing out. It rivets the viewer's attention on one thing. So it's, you know, there's no doubt that what we wanted the viewer to look at here was these signs. But you still got enough contextual information going on in the background, even though it's not sharp. You got enough contextual visual information going on in the background that there's enough there that you can kind of move your eyes around. A wide lens opening makes that very easy. And certainly those wide lens openings, you know, they make it great to freeze action, any kind of moving subjects. Again, riveting your attention on your subject, and so on. Now, I talked about sharpness in the context of stopping your lens all the way down, and I said that, hey, at the smallest opening, at f/22 or whatever, the lens isn't as sharp as it could be if you opened it up a little bit. To be honest, the same thing is true when we shoot wide open with most lenses. There's a few exceptions out there, but with most lenses, if we stop the lens down even just a stop or so, we're gonna get sharper results. Not so much a change in what's sharp foreground to background, but just the lens itself will just report back a sharper image into the camera. Sometimes it's a noticeable difference, sometimes not much. So, you know, again, it's something that you can test. I mean, just shoot something like, you know, just anything with detail. Just shoot straight into a brick wall or something. Shoot a picture with the lens wide open and shoot the picture, you know, stop down like a stop. And just go back in your computer and look. Don't expect to see it on the monitor on the back of your camera, but take your images and go look in the computer and then see what kind of results you get. And see if you see a noticeable difference in terms of how sharp the detail is. That can really make a difference in situations where you're shooting something that's flat and has a lot of detail and texture. Is if you just stop the lens down just a little bit, you can actually get more sharpness and crispness sometimes than if you shoot wide open. But again, we have to make choices. We have to weigh and assess. If this was in a cathedral actually, if this is in like a totally darkened area of that cathedral, it may be, hey, look, we need every bit of light gathering we can get to get this picture, and that means opening the lens all the way up to let as much light in as we can. And hey, if that's not the sharpest place that the lens can produce images at, hey, no big, you know. So it's really what so much of this about is making choices. But I want to add to that photography doesn't have to be complicated. This doesn't have to be a case of, oh, I see a picture, but let me stop and think for 15 minutes about what all the different parameters would do and all that, and let me come to a decision. With most scenes, in 15 minutes, either the scene is gone, the subject is gone, or the light is gone. So, you know, this should be something that becomes, if not a totally automated process in your mind, something that becomes a process that you can practice and kind of work through quickly. Really, again, it comes down to just having a sense of what those three fundamental pillars of photography are going to do for you. What a shutter speed will do in different situations. That's not the same answer in every situation. What a lens aperture will do in different scenarios and different situations. And what role ISO can do to help you get one or the other when they matter. There are going to be times where one matters and the other doesn't. And like I say, I repeat, there are going to be times where, neither one matters. I just need to take a snapshot. That's fine. I get it. You know, so again, to kind of wrap things up, you know, we started out, you know, kind of saying indirectly, why not just leave the camera in the totally automatic green zone? By getting it out of the green zone and going into something at least like the program mode, if not your shutter priority or your aperture priority, you now have the ability to control exposure. You can lighten and darken as you need to. Lightening and darkening with that exposure compensation is kind of like seasoning to taste to some degree. It isn't just a matter of getting the right exposure. Sometimes you want to just touch it up a little bit. You reach a point where you want to control it enough that I want to lighten this a little bit, I want to darken it a little bit. I've said in other contexts, it's kind of like people putting sugar in their coffee or salt on their french fries. There's some people like a lot of it, some people like just a little. You may find that you like a look in your pictures that's like a little on the light side, a little on the bright side. You just like what that does, and maybe you need to compensate for what the camera is kind of programmed, if you will, to do. Conversely, you may be one of these kind of people that says, hey, I like a deeper, moodier look in my pictures most of the time. I don't mind when the shadows go totally black. I kind of like the deeper colors that I get when I underexpose a little bit. And maybe the camera isn't doing that out of the box without help. Exposure compensation is your help. It's gonna, by taking the camera out of the green zone, you are gonna be able to, when you need to, apply different shutter effects to show blur and deliberate movement, to freeze movement. Same thing with aperture effects. You're gonna be able to control the look. There is no one look that everybody uses all the time. One moment you may be taking, portraits of somebody. You may be taking close-up pictures of a flower or something. Hey, 15 minutes later, you may be taking landscape pictures, in the Swiss Alps or whatever. I'm not saying you go to Switzerland in 15 minutes, but you know what I mean. So there are times where, one situation answers you once, something else is the right answer a different time. It's by getting out of the green zone, you get to directly, if you want, control the ISO, how much noise is going to be in your pictures. When you start looking close. And I repeat again, I know I'm covering ground I did already. Don't be afraid of things like noise. Don't be one of these people who says, because I've certainly heard them out there, who says, oh, I could never shoot a picture at anything over about ISO 200 or 400. There's just way too much noise. Again, shoot a test with your camera and just see what the results are at different ISOs. And sometimes a noisy but otherwise sharp picture is the right answer in really, really low light levels or whatever, where you can't use flash or whatever it might be. And the other thing, of course, is that the green zone is going to give you full access to everything your camera can do. Excuse me, getting out of the green zone, I mean to say. I misspoke there. Getting out of the green zone, on a Canon camera anyway, means you've taken the training wheels off, and now you've got access to everything that camera can do. All the menu settings suddenly become available. All the custom functions in the camera become available. There may be some you never ever touch, and that's fine, but the point is you can get to them and play with them if you want to, whereas you might not have ever seen them if you leave the camera in the green zone. So there's an awful lot of reason, even if you like to use the concept of automatic exposure, where the camera is basically deciding, okay, set the exposure for the shade, set the exposure for the sun, point it up at the sky, set the exposure. There's nothing wrong with automatic exposure. But even if you like the concept of automatic exposure, the ability to be able to step in right away and control one of those three things when you need to get the look you want, it's going to change your photography. And it's going to, by giving you that confidence that, hey, I can get a look I want, you open a door to all kinds of other totally cool stuff visually, and you'll begin to start thinking about ways that your photography can grow. That can mean, things like, moving into different lenses and starting to work with speed lights and stuff. And all this business about being able to control a lens opening and so on matters when we're working with flash too. None of what we talked about today had anything to do with flash, but understand that it's yet another thing you want to be able to control and understand when you start getting into other areas of photography, flash just being one example. So the bottom line is, think about what the shutter speeds can do. And don't just, it's beyond just, hey, I know a fast shutter speed freezes action and a slow shutter speed means action will be blurred. Think about connecting the dots, so to speak, so that when you see something out there in the real world, you can think to yourself, using the right shutter speed is going to give me a visual effect to capture this the way I want to. And that could be you want a deliberate blur or a fast shutter speed that freezes any movement or whatever. But that's where it really becomes fun, is when you can make the transition from not just academically knowing, okay, you know, that guy from Canon said fast shutter speeds mean sharp pictures of moving subjects. It's like you can look at something when you're out in the park or out on vacation with your family or just walking around, you know, in your backyard or whatever, and you can see things and you can say, whoa, I don't want to just document this, I want to photograph this. And I know what the effect of a shutter speed will do to give me the look I'm looking for. Same thing with lens apertures. Understand what a wide aperture, the medium apertures, and the small apertures are going to do for you. And again, how to connect that when you're in real situations. It takes practice. The only way you begin to connect those dots, really, aside from coming to seminars like this one, is to actually go out and use the camera. People that, you know, take the camera with them and they pick the camera up a few times a week and they're just out playing with it and stuff, they're the people that begin to learn how to make the tools work for them. The people where the camera comes out just for things like holiday parties and Easter bunnies and the one trip that they take in the summertime with the family to Cape Cod or something, and otherwise the camera just sits on the shelf, it's going to be hard for that person to just start to connect the dots, even if they academically understand what a lens opening does and what a shutter speed does and what an ISO does. But all three of them are so important in terms of being able to just fundamentally control the camera. And this is all of what it's about in terms of getting out of the green zone and starting to experiment now with what the camera can really do. Again, I repeat, just taking the training wheels off. You start doing some of that, start thinking about what the settings will do and how you can apply them when you see a subject with your own eyes. And you'll be on that road to taking great pictures. So that's the end of our presentation. I want to thank you folks very much, those of you who joined us here. For those of you who are, thank you. Thank you.